When I was 7, she became lame in one leg. By the time I was 10, she had developed cataracts and lost sight in one eye. When I turned 15, she was bedridden, seemingly on the brink of death. She stopped giving divinations and predictions to anyone, leaving me with 4 letters instead. Qianqian, remember, these 4 letters must be opened at specific times. No matter what is written inside, you must follow the instructions. If I am no longer here in the future, you must stay strong on your own. My grandmother held my hand as she spoke, her body unusually cold. When it was time to open the first letter, I was bursting with curiosity and quickly tore open the envelope. Inside was just a single sheet of paper with a line of neat handwriting, "Do not help pregnant women." That's it. I was somewhat disappointed, expecting some earth-shattering secret. On my way home from school that day, a long-haired pregnant woman carrying groceries suddenly crouched down in front of me, groaning in pain. I asked, "Auntie, are you okay? My stomach hurts a bit. Little girl, could you help me? My home is just up ahead." The woman's voice sounded strange, almost as if she was forcing it. Our teachers always taught us to help others, especially someone in need like a pregnant woman. I pushed the letters warning to the back of my mind and followed the direction she pointed, helping her walk. As we walked, I began to notice something was off. She said her home was just ahead, but she led me down several winding paths, heading deeper into the woods. The surroundings became increasingly deserted, and as the sun set, the area grew darker. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed her hand. It was rough and large, unlike a woman's hand. And her belly felt soft. I remembered my grandmother saying that a pregnant woman's belly should be firm and tight. There weren't many people in the village, and I hadn't heard of any woman being pregnant recently. The further we walked, the more uneasy I became. Suddenly, I was reminded of the recent high-profile criminal case that has been causing quite a stir. Wanted posters were plastered everywhere, describing a killer who roamed rural areas, disguising himself as a pregnant woman, a disabled person, or other identities to lure girls around 15 years old. So far, 3 victims had been tortured and killed. A strong intuition told me that the pregnant woman beside me was the Class A wanted criminal. "Little girl, why have you stopped? My home is just ahead, we're almost there. Are you cold? Why are you shaking so much? When did you recognize me?" The criminal seemed to have read my thoughts from my expression. He dropped his disguise, his voice turning deep and masculine, and his large hand clamped tightly around my neck. The thug seemed to see through my thoughts from my expression. He shed his disguise, his voice reverting to a deep male tone, and a large hand clamped down on my neck. I bit his arm with my teeth, forcing him to release me. Without a second thought, I raised my knee and struck his groin with all my might. This was the self-defense technique my grandmother had taught me, the only move I knew, but one I had practiced for 10 years. Taking advantage of his howling as he clutched his lower body, I broke free and sprinted away, screaming for help. But the area was desolate, and no one would come to my rescue. The speed and strength of an adult man were no match for a young girl like me. In less than half a minute, the thug caught up with me. He slapped me so hard that my eardrums bled, and my vision blurred. I lost all strength to resist. He dragged me under a large tree, swiftly removed his wig, took off the padding from his abdomen, and stripped off the loose dress, revealing his true form. His eyes gleamed with greed as he roughly tore at my clothes. My mind went blank, filled only with endless regret. Why hadn't I listened to my grandmother? Bang! A loud gunshot rang out. The thug, on the verge of succeeding, staggered as a burst of blood sprayed from his shoulder. A small, frail figure rushed forward like a gust of wind. Compared to the tall, burly thug, she seemed tiny and hunched, but in my eyes, she was a hero of epic proportions. "Grandma, save me!" I cried out in a broken voice. My grandmother's face was grim as she pulled the trigger again, but the gun jammed. "You old hag, ruining my plans. I'll kill you first." The thug pulled out a sharp knife and lunged at my grandmother. In her youth, my grandmother could take on strong men, but now she was a flickering candle in the wind. 1 stab, 2 stabs, 3 stabs. Her back was pierced, but she found an inexplicable strength, holding on to the thug without a sound. In the end, it was the thug who collapsed first. It turned out my grandmother had laced the knife with poison. "Qianqian, remember to claim the bounty," my grandmother said before she fell into a deep sleep. No matter how much I shook her, she wouldn't wake up. It was as if my grandmother had known I would be in danger. She had called the police in advance, and they took the unconscious thug away. He was sentenced without question. How she had discovered the thug remained a mystery. I received a bounty of 200,000 yuan, the last gift my grandmother left me. This incident became a permanent scar in my heart. I buried her behind the house in a sunny spot, close to home, so I could see her every time I returned. Later, I fulfilled my dream of getting into medical school. I couldn't save my own grandmother, but perhaps I could save someone else's. As for the remaining 3 letters, they weren't forgotten with time. Instead, I treasured them, keeping them by my side through the passing seasons. 7 years had passed since I opened the first letter. After graduating from university, I joined a hospital. My life was monotonous, filled with nothing but work, and I felt increasingly suffocated. Every time I scrolled through my social media and saw my best friend Zhongting's travel photos from around the world, I couldn't help but feel envious. Zhongting was my high school classmate, and we had always been close. She was doing well for herself, having started a successful travel company abroad after graduation. She had achieved financial freedom. One day, she suddenly returned to the country and contacted me. She booked an expensive private restaurant, and we chatted for hours, even sharing a few drinks. I admired her life. I had never traveled far, let alone gone abroad. It's not that hard. Just buy a ticket and fly over. Listen to me, take a few days off and come with me to relax. If you keep going like this, you'll end up with depression. I'll cover everything, food, lodging, travel. Don't be polite, I've got the money. Zhongting was incredibly generous and immediately booked 2 first-class tickets for a spontaneous trip. Since the tickets were already bought, and I wasn't one to be overly cautious, I took a week off. As I was packing, I suddenly remembered the second letter. The envelope said to open it on your first trip abroad. Isn't that right now? How was the envelope opened? The wax seal on the envelope was specially made by my grandmother, and the only way to open it was by tearing it. But now, there are signs of damage on the cover. Before I could even ask, my best friend Zhongting sent me a message apologizing. She said that I had too much to drink yesterday, and the envelope fell out of my clothes. When she picked it up, she accidentally used too much force and damaged it. She knew how important this letter was to me, so she swore that she hadn't peeked. Inside the envelope was a note with a line written on it, "Trust your friends." It was my grandmother's handwriting. I couldn't help but feel that the beginning of the letter seemed a bit worn, as if some text had been erased. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. Zhongting is my best friend, she would never tamper with my letter. I trust her completely. This is the first time in my life that I have taken a plane and traveled abroad. My heart is filled with anticipation and excitement. A few hours later, we arrived in Bangkok. A black Mercedes-Benz business van appeared outside the airport. Let's go to the hotel to rest first. I'll take you to the night market tonight. I guarantee it will be an eye-opener for you. Zhongting handed me a bottle of local coconut water and said a few words in Thai to the driver that I couldn't understand. Are you guys discussing selling me off? I recently came across various news online about fellow countrymen being deceived into going overseas for telecom fraud. At first, I was worried, but my grandmother's letter told me to trust my friends, so naturally, I didn't doubt it and just casually joked. Unexpectedly, Zhongting's smile froze, and she looked startled and surprised. How do you understand Thai? Before I could react, I felt a dizzying sensation and my consciousness quickly faded. That bottle of coconut water was drugged. When I woke up again, I was in a dim and damp basement. My phone and luggage were long gone, and there were several girls around my age with me, but Zhongting was not there. My heart sank, and my breathing became rapid. I tried to open the sealed iron door, but it was already locked. Through the crack in the door, I could see security personnel outside wearing camouflage uniforms and carrying firearms. This is bad. Stop struggling. Once you're here, you have to accept your fate, a girl who had arrived 2 days earlier than me said with swollen eyes and a bruised face. She had tried every method she could think of, but nothing worked. She had already fallen into despair. Everyone locked up here was a fellow countryman, and their situations were basically the same as mine, all deceived by so-called friends, or besties. My heart sank again. Why would Zhongting harm me? Why did my grandmother's letter tell me to trust her? Where did things go wrong? I huddled in the corner, hugging my legs, and my mind raced through the related news reports I had seen in recent years. Most men deceived here were sent to telecom fraud parks to work like slaves. As for women, their fates were even more tragic. None of these situations were acceptable to me. I used to wonder why, despite the country's extensive anti-fraud campaigns, people still fell for scams. Now I finally understand that some dangers are simply unavoidable. Overwhelming fear made me tremble uncontrollably. I clutched the talisman around my neck, which my grandmother had made for me, but she wouldn't come to my rescue like she did 7 years ago. I don't know how much time passed. The iron door opened. My best friend Zhongting appeared at the door, but the familiar warmth in her expression was gone, replaced only by coldness and mockery. The previous intimacy was all an act. She was actually the supervisor of this human trafficking ring. Zhongting, I have never done anything to wrong you. Why did you deceive me? I was burning with anger, but my voice was barely above a whisper. Shu Qian, you were good to me, but the world is just this cruel. I have no choice. Who made you young and beautiful? Blame it on the tough market these days. Strangers are hard to deceive, so we can only deceive acquaintances. Your grandmother is indeed a remarkable person. Zhongting shrugged and then gave me a thumbs up. You tampered with the content of that letter, didn't you? I accused. Yes, the original message was don't trust friends. Zhongting admitted to altering it. During high school, I had once told her the secret about the letter, which allowed her to plan this trap for me in advance. 2 security guards took me out of the room. But since we're sisters, I can't bear to see you ruined. If you can come up with 500,000, I'll let you go. Zhong Ting returned my phone and told me to transfer the money to her. I had no choice but to transfer all my savings to her designated account, but it still wasn't enough. Zhong Ting kindly pointed me in the direction of taking out online loans and borrowing from colleagues and friends. In the end, I scraped together over 500,000. Can I go now? I held my breath, waiting for Zhong Ting to nod. How can you still be as naive as you were in high school? Do you really think I would let you return to your country? Zhong Ting's ugly true colors were fully revealed. She never had any intention of letting me go from the very beginning. I collapsed to the ground, feeling as if my soul had been sucked out, unable to utter a single word. This time, it seems no one can save me. That night, several girls from the basement were brought out. Each of them had a number tag hanging on their chest, and was taken to a stage above ground that resembled a theater. Dozens of masked men, all wealthy businessmen, were seated below. We were being treated as commodities, auctioned off with clear prices. Number 10, a top university graduate, a female PhD, never had a boyfriend, starting bid at 1 million. Zhong Ting, holding a microphone, acted as the host. Many bosses below began raising their paddles. After some competition, I was bought by a 60-year-old man for 2 million. Zhong Ting couldn't stop smiling, but I felt as if my heart had died. After the transaction was completed, I was transferred several times before finally arriving at the buyer's home. I couldn't bear such an outcome. I would rather die. Just as I was about to bite my tongue to end my life, I heard a voice with a familiar hometown accent. Where did you get this pendant? My hood was removed, and the old man didn't touch me but stared at my pendant. This was given to me by my grandmother, I answered truthfully. He quickly untied my ropes and had the servants dress me in a thick, warm coat. Over a decade ago, the old man was still living in China. At that time, he had saved some money and wanted to engage in some shady business with a few friends. But being superstitious, he sought out my grandmother, who was already quite famous, to have his fortune told. My grandmother told him that engaging in shady business would lead to a dead end and advised him to pursue legitimate business, promising that he would prosper in the future. My grandmother's fortune-telling fees were high, but this time she didn't charge him. Instead, she gave him a condition. She said that if he ever saw someone wearing this, he must do his best to help her, the old man said, holding up a talisman identical to the one around my neck. This was the token my grandmother had given him. Those friends of mine, who went into shady business, either got life sentences or worse. Now, we're even, and I don't have to think about it anymore. It's like settling a debt, the old man finished. As he spoke, the talisman around my neck and the one in his hand simultaneously cracked and turned to dust. A true sage, a true sage. Not only did the old man not touch me, but he also politely let me go and personally escorted me to the airport. After all, if my grandmother could foresee even this step, how could he dare to have any improper thoughts about me? It wasn't until I set foot on my homeland that I came to my senses. Was it really that simple? It wasn't because of my good luck, but because my grandmother had saved my life over a decade ago. After narrowly escaping death, I immediately reported to the police. Zhong Ting was completely unaware of my ordeal. She was still posting moments of her refined life on social media and contacting acquaintances back home. Not long after, she returned to the country to carry out a scam, but was arrested as soon as she got off the plane. She desperately tried to explain her innocence, but when she found out it was me who had reported her, she completely lost it. Zhong Ting had initially planned to seek bail on the grounds of being pregnant, but due to extreme emotional turmoil, she suffered a miscarriage and was eventually sentenced to 15 years in prison. During this time, I visited her in prison once. Xu Qian. Why did you betray me? How did you escape? I was just one step away from quitting. I was about to get married. Why did you stop me? Do you know, I lost my husband, you killed my child, you ruined my life. I will never forgive you, even as a ghost. Zhong Ting cried hysterically, her voice filled with despair, looking as if she wanted to kill me but was powerless to do so. I replied to her, just focus on reforming yourself here. My life gradually returned to normal, but after going through so much hardship, I could never fully trust anyone again. That was until Li Mingze appeared. He was originally one of my patients, but we had a special connection. We lived close to each other, shared similar interests and values, and got along very well. Li Mingze was gentle and refined, came from a well-off family, had a great personality, and being handsome was just one of his least notable qualities. Being with him always felt like a breath of fresh air. However, in matters of the heart, I was quite slow and always kept my guard up. I knew he had feelings for me, but it wasn't until we had been together for almost a year that we officially became a couple. This was my first love, but before this, I wasn't lacking in suitors. Perhaps influenced by my grandmother, I was very traditional and slow to warm up. Those boys who only cared about my body and appearance couldn't move me. Li Mingze truly loved me. He could tolerate all my flaws, took care of me meticulously, and gave me, a lonely person, a sense of home. On my 25th birthday, Li Mingze proposed to me. He meticulously arranged a grand proposal ceremony, inviting our mutual friends and family, making it very romantic and warm. Dear Xu Qian, will you marry me? Li Mingze, dressed in a dazzling white suit, knelt on one knee and presented a diamond ring symbolizing eternal love. Of course, I wanted to say yes. But before that, there was one thing I had to do. I took out the third letter my grandmother had left me from a hidden pocket in my coat. The envelope read, "Open when proposed to for the first time." The letter contained only 5 words, "Beware of the demon, run." I was stunned. The demon? Who else could it be but Li Mingze? Having learned from the previous 2 bloody lessons, this time I didn't hesitate for a second. I smashed the birthday cake in my hand onto Li Mingze's face and turned to run. To hell with love. Li Mingze was dumbfounded, the guests at the scene were all stunned, but none of that mattered to me. My grandmother's words were the most important. The content of the letter was only 5 words, "Beware of the demon, run." My heart was filled with fear. A demon. Who else could it be but Li Mingze? Having learned from the previous 2 lessons, this time I didn't hesitate. I smashed the birthday cake in my hand directly onto Li Mingze's face and turned to run. What does love matter? Li Mingze was stunned, and all the guests present were shocked, but what did that have to do with me? The world may be vast, but my grandmother's words are the most important. Xu Qian, you've gone too far. Mingze loves you so much, yet you caused such a scene in public. Apologize to Li Mingze immediately. You'll regret losing such a perfect boyfriend. Li Mingze has been looking for you everywhere. Stop hiding and go see him to apologize. One after another, my colleagues called and texted me, all blaming me. Li Mingze had won their hearts by buying them lots of food and small gifts. Anyone who wants to marry him, go ahead. My grandmother told me to run, so I must run far away, ensuring Li Mingze can't find me. Xu Qian, you must have your reasons for doing this, right? No matter what others say or what has happened, please tell me, okay? I'll face it with you. Where are you? Please contact me. I'm really worried sick. Li Mingze sent me many messages and made countless calls. The first time, I didn't heed the warning in the letter and helped a stranger, nearly falling into the hands of a bad person, which led to my grandmother's death. The second time, I told Zhongting the secret of the letter, and she altered its content, almost leading me into hell. This time, I won't be foolish anymore. I decisively deleted and blocked all contact information related to Li Mingze. Recalling our passionate love, I didn't think much at the time, but now, calm and collected, I realized Li Mingze was too perfect, as if tailor-made for me, somewhat unreal. Perhaps his intentions towards me weren't pure. Out of the 4 letters, I've opened 3, with only the last one remaining. This 4th letter is different from the other 3, with the instruction, open immediately after reading the 3rd. After reading the letter's content, I was thrown into confusion. Besides the text, there were 3 unfamiliar phone numbers. No matter where I am, I return to my hometown every year on the anniversary of my grandmother's death. The house is covered in spider webs, and my grandmother's grave is overgrown with weeds. Although she had helped many people, the villagers always feared and avoided her, considering her an ill omen. Rumors spread in the village that my grandmother brought misfortune to my parents, and I caused her death. They secretly called me the curse of loneliness. No one wanted to associate with my family. But that didn't matter, because my grandmother said that true death is being forgotten. As long as I remember her, she is still alive. After clearing the weeds, I placed the fruits my grandmother liked in front of her grave. Suddenly, a sharp pain shot through my back, followed by total paralysis, and I fell to the ground. Finally caught you. Did you really think you could escape my grasp? A gloomy-faced Li Mingze emerged from the bushes not far away, holding a knife. How did you get here? I asked in terror, struggling to crawl until I retreated to the threshold between the yard and the inner room, completely out of strength, but still conscious. Xu Qian, you're so pitiful, the only one left in your family. Killing you is like killing an ant. Li Mingze was no longer the gentle gentleman I knew, revealing a perverted smile as he grabbed my hair and dragged me into the house. Trembling, my voice filled with tears, can't we part on good terms? What you're doing is illegal. Part on good terms? Ha 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 ha. Are you joking? Did you really think I had genuine feelings for you? Do you know who I am? Li Mingze seemed to find something amusing, laughing even more maniacally. Li Mingze seemed to have discovered something interesting, and was in no hurry to act against me. Instead, he threw a photo at my face. The man in the photo was someone I would recognize even if he turned to ashes. It was the very same man, who had disguised himself as a pregnant woman 7 years ago, the villain. He is my father, Li Mingze revealed, shocking me to my core. Did you deliberately get close to me? I recalled every moment I had spent with Li Mingze, realizing now that it had all been an elaborate trap and disguise, a thought that sent chills down my spine. Perhaps in your eyes, my father was a bad man, but in mine, he was a great one. He did whatever he wanted, unbound by laws or morals. That's amazing. Back then, my father had already arranged a boat to take me abroad to start anew, but something happened the day before we were supposed to leave. You have no idea how devastated I was. Li Mingzi showed no remorse or guilt for his father's actions, instead, he saw them as justified. After his father was sentenced, he followed his mother abroad, where she married an older man involved in illegal activities, and began engaging in black market dealings. Growing up in such an environment, Li Mingzi's inherent criminal tendencies were fully unleashed. As an adult, he took over his stepfather's illegal business, amassing huge profits. To better expand his domestic market, Li Mingzi spent several years returning to China to attend university, during which he met his fiancée, Zhong Ting. Zhong Ting is just like me, born to defy rules and laws. We were destined to be together, Li Mingzi said. She came back with me to the fraud compound and helped establish a tourism company that continuously supplied resources for me. She's truly my perfect partner. I never expected Zhong Ting to be your best friend. I originally planned to lure you in and slowly torment you, but who knew you'd be so valuable? Someone was willing to pay 2 million for you, so I temporarily put that plan aside. But I can't figure out how you managed to escape back to the country. And not only did you return, but you also reported Zhong Ting to the police. We had already agreed to do one last job before retiring. Why couldn't you just let her go? She was even pregnant. Li Mingzi's veins bulged on his forehead as he grew more agitated, his face turning red. Because of you, my father was sentenced. And because of you, my fiancée was sentenced to over a decade in prison, and she even lost the baby. She sent me a message from inside, telling me to make you pay. But you're too cautious. You should have fallen into the trap, but suddenly, it was like you became a different person. Could it be because of that letter? Li Mingzi's expression turned puzzled. I heard your grandmother could predict the future. That old woman gave you 4 letters before she died. The first letter told you not to help strangers, but you didn't listen, and that's how my father almost got you. The second letter warned you not to trust friends, but Zhong Ting got you drunk and altered the contents, which is how we managed to deceive you. The third letter was the one you opened when I proposed to you. You panicked and ran away after reading it. Could it be that your grandmother foresaw that I would harm you? Li Mingzi searched me and found the 4th letter. Contact the numbers above and tell them that the day of my death will be the day of their revenge. That was the content of the final letter, with 3 phone numbers listed below. Ha, nonsense. Let's see if your dead grandmother can protect you one more time. Li Mingzi lost his last shred of patience and gripped a scalpel, aiming to peel the skin off my face. Thud. A muffled sound came from outside the window. A weapon struck Li Mingzi squarely in the back of his shoulder, causing him to stagger and collapse to the ground. Immediately, 3 men and 3 women burst into the room. Their eyes were bloodshot, their faces weary and haggard, as if they were in a daze. Uncles and aunts, you heard what he just said. Now you can act in righteous defense against this demon, I said, my earlier fear and panic completely gone, replaced by a cold, confident composure. The 3 men and 3 women simultaneously raised their weapons and unleashed a furious barrage on Li Mingzi. 7 years ago, Li Mingzi's father had harmed 3 girls. The 3 men and 3 women before me were the parents of those 3 victims. After their daughters' tragic deaths, they lived in constant torment and pain. Although that monster had been brought to justice, it could not erase the scars in their hearts, nor had they received even a single apology. Once, a reporter interviewed Li Mingzi's father before his execution, asking if he had any regrets. But he said he had none, and if given another chance, he would have done it more discreetly, completely destroying the evidence. 7 years ago, my grandmother had contacted the victims' families, telling them that there would be an opportunity 7 years later, and advising them not to change their phone numbers. After opening the 4th letter, I dialed the number on it and learned the whole story. It turned out that my grandmother had foreseen this ordeal, and had already prepared a safeguard for me. She was no jinx, she had saved my life 4 times. Afterward, I reported it to the police. Li Mingzi was convicted of human trafficking, and his overseas operations were completely dismantled. The 3 sets of parents and I gave consistent testimonies, claiming self-defense, and not only were we acquitted, but we were also credited with indirectly contributing to the case. Having no parents of my own, I adopted them as my godparents. Every year on the anniversary of my grandmother's death, we would gather for a reunion dinner. I finally had a family. At the age of 30, I fell seriously ill. After recovering, I suddenly gained the ability to see a black hole above everyone's head. These were temporal rifts, connecting each person's past and future. This was how my grandmother had been able to foresee events. I entered my own temporal rift and traveled back to the past, where I saw my 15-year-old self opening the first letter from my grandmother. But I was just a spirit, invisible to everyone, including myself. Watching as a disguised pregnant woman lured my 15-year-old self away, I urgently floated back home. Qianqian, long time no see, my grandmother, lying weakly on her deathbed, seemed to see me and struggled to sit up. Beside her bed lay a gun, its bullets laced with poison. Grandma. Grandma. I wanted to throw myself into her arms, but I didn't pass through her, I could actually touch her. You've grown up. These years, you've suffered alone. My grandmother stroked my head. It seems you've inherited that ability. My body is failing, my eyes can't see, and my legs are weak. Help me, I need to save you. My grandmother pulled my soul into her body, and her fragile soul completely shattered. Don't linger in the past, and don't pry into the future. You can't bear the consequences. These were my grandmother's last words before she died. But I could briefly control her body. No wonder it seemed like my grandmother had a sudden burst of energy back then. So this is how it was. I suddenly understood. I grabbed the gun and, using my grandmother's body, ran as fast as I could. Only I knew where the kidnapper would take my 15-year-old self. I arrived just in time and shot the criminal. But the second shot jammed. I then clung to him, waiting for the poison to take effect. The criminal stabbed my body repeatedly, but I felt no pain, only a gradual detachment of my soul. Finally, the criminal succumbed to the poison and collapsed, and I reached my limit. My 15-year-old self ran over, and I wanted to say something to her, but all I managed was, remember to claim the reward. My soul returned to the present, back to my 30-year-old self. It turned out everything had been predestined all along. You think you can change something, but in reality, you can't change anything. A few years later, I met someone who truly loved me, and we started a family, eventually having a child. Later, my husband died unexpectedly, and I was filled with guilt, regretting why I hadn't used my ability to help him avoid the danger. To prevent such a tragedy from happening again, I couldn't resist peeking into my child's future, trying to help them avoid risks. Not long after, I lost sight in one eye and was dismissed from the hospital. To make a living and raise my child, I returned to my husband's village and became a fortune teller.